Benedikt is actually leading a deep dive Power Platform ALM live online course for CRM Consultant on the 29th and 30th of August. If you're enjoying this episode before that date and you're interested in leveling up your ALM skills, check out the links in the show notes to register for Benedikt's course. That address is amazingapps.show/147. Hi, I'm Neil Benson from Customery. Welcome to Amazing Apps. I'm here to help you build amazing, agile Dynamics 365 and Power Platform applications your stakeholders will love. Thanks for joining me. This is episode 147. If you're listening to the audio podcast, you'll find show notes for this episode at amazingapps.show/147. Today's episode is all about ALM, Application Lifecycle Management. Power Platform ALM describes how we deploy and maintain our applications. Healthy ALM is when we have robust governance, processes, and tools for deploying and maintaining applications in production in a way that's secure, repeatable, and efficient. ALM used to be hard and was only really practiced by teams of experienced developers building enterprise applications. But according to our friend Nick Dolman, no project is too small for ALM days. Even if you're a team of one low-code app builder, you should have a repeatable way of securely and efficiently deploying and maintaining your application in production. Benedikt Bergmann joins me on Amazing Apps today. He's a Power Platform consultant at CRM Consultant in Sweden. You'll find links to Benedikt's LinkedIn profile, his blog, and his GitHub page in the show notes. In this episode, Benedikt and I discuss the different ALM options for small teams building simple apps and enterprise teams building mission-critical apps. We discuss tools and environments and testing and components that don't fit in solutions and lots more. Here's Benedikt Bergmann from CRM Consultant. Benedikt, welcome to Amazing Applications. It's great to have you on the show. Welcome, my friend.
Yeah, thank you for having me. Great to be in here.
It's great to connect with you. I'm wondering if you could maybe help us in this topic, and we'll talk about the appropriate ALM strategies for different sized projects. I haven't touched the new Power Platform pipelines features yet. I hope I can say that right a few times correctly. Power Platform pipelines. And I'm wondering if you've researched that, if you've used them in projects. So let's start with that and figure out what size of project is ALM good for? What's the smallest sized project where an ALM approach is worthwhile?
Yeah, so to quote one of our dear friends, Nick Dolman, he once said in a session, no project is too small for ALM, and I totally agree. So we usually do ALM even if it's just one person. Or
wow.
I do it in my project when it's only one person, when it's only me. So because if you set it up and if you have the good practices, as you mentioned, and if you have like templates and so on, then it's not that big of a deal setting it up, and it will help in the long run, time wise, and if someone else comes in and takes over and so on.
So there's lots of different parts to ALM. If you're on your own doing a single person project, are you doing everything? Are we just talking about moving solutions from one environment to another and checking the solution into source code? Is there more to it than that when it's just you?
Yeah, so we have this, internally we have this template. It's a YAML file or different YAML files combined to one, but it basically does several stuff. There are basically two YAML files, one for exporting stuff and one for deploying or releasing it to the downstream environments. So the first one is creating our artifacts, which is basically the solution, or if you have any Azure functions around and so on. But this is also running our tests, building the solution and checking whether or not the build is going through for all the plugins and so on. And compiling our front-end stuff, the scripts from TypeScript to JavaScript, and deploying the latest version to development, and then doing an export. So it's not just the export and unzip to the source control. It's the other stuff as well. And if the project doesn't have any development, because those projects we have as well, where we only do low code stuff, then it's easy to inactivate. It's just like configuration, yes, no, or true, false in that case. And then it will just skip the other stuff.
Okay. You mentioned YAML file, which is enough to put, strike fear into a lot of people's hearts. What's your experience like working with YAML? Does it take a long time to get the kind of experience required to maintain this YAML file that your team is using in your template?
Yeah, it took me some while to really get it right, and there is still some. We see bugs every now and then and fix it.
Right.
So it's not the easiest thing, YAML, but if you understood it once, then you like kind of get a hold of it. But it's easier if you are a developer. That's
right.
for sure. But I mean, I started with the UI pipelines, the normal click and point stuff in DevOps. That's working fine as well. You can't do it as good as templates as you would do with YAML files. So the templating is better with YAML files.
All right. So in terms of sophistication, your team tends to use Azure DevOps with a template with YAML files in it, even on very small projects. But if maybe I'm not a developer, maybe I'm just an application builder, and I don't have a lot of Azure DevOps pipelines experience. Tell us about the new Power Platform pipelines. Are they worth using? Should I try them, or should I just bite the bullet and go and learn Azure DevOps?
So we haven't used them in any project so far because they weren't, they haven't had all the features we needed. They weren't able to store an unpacked version of the solution in the source control and so on. But now that's the
version I remember. Yeah.
Yeah.
Where's the source control?
Yeah, exactly. And that was one of the main things I was missing, or for me was missing. But a few weeks ago, they released a new version where you can have pre and post steps to your deployment. And then you could request Azure DevOps pipeline from your Power Platform pipeline. And this one could do stuff you want to have, like anything else, like deploying to an Azure function, or unpack a solution or extract a solution, unpack it and store it in the source control before it will be deployed to test or production. So now it got better, and it basically now is in a state where we could use it for smaller projects, but still it's not as good for templating than it is in plain Azure DevOps or GitHub Actions. Yeah.
Okay. So maybe use Power Platform pipelines if you're a very small team of makers, low code components, where it sounds like you still might need a professional developer somewhere in the background to help you calling Azure DevOps to do some of the more sophisticated things. But that developer could set up the Azure DevOps components for you once, and then you can build your own and maintain your own Power Platform pipelines. I've got to be honest with you, Benedikt, from what you've just described, I'd still probably prefer teams learn Azure DevOps. Sounds like they're going to have to do that anyway. But we'll see. It's really interesting space to watch, and I really appreciate the team at Microsoft putting the effort in to help low code teams use a mature ALM process.
Yeah, I mean, if you don't have a developer or a pro coder by hand, then those pipelines are a good alternative, because then it's most of the time either no ALM at all or manual ALM only,
right?
Or that's basically what you have. So now you can go like the step and say, okay, we have some automation, but it's not like the whole flagship thing. It's just the smaller one, but it's better than nothing. So
yeah, okay. And for those smaller projects, how many environments do you normally see teams provision? Is there a recommended number for small projects and for enterprise projects?
Yeah, so we usually require 3, dev, test, and production. We have some customers where we took over the solution from other vendors, and they only have two, like they have test and production. And in that case, it's hard to convince them to have a third one, even so it's no additional cost. So yeah. But usually we at least have three. I was in one project where we were like 40 or 50 people in the project, and there we had 12 or 13 environments.
Okay.
And that was like the normal amount they had in all of the project, not only Dynamics or Power Platform. It was all of their web development. They all had development, integration development, and Q&A, performance test, and whatever. But for the dynamic implementation, it felt a bit too much. So something in between, I would say 3 and 12 is like the main goal.
My team's 3 at a minimum, even for the smallest projects, and then most of our enterprise projects tend to be 5 or 6 environments.
Yeah.
And some of those higher environments are shared environments. So, we're doing maybe a staging environment.
Yes.
And that's coupled up to the staging version of the legacy system, or the staging version of the ERP, or the staging version of the government system, or whatever it is we're hooking into. So it's a big shared state pre-production environment with lots of different applications running in it.
What we usually have in addition, sometimes is if the customer wants to do stuff themselves, then they get a different development environment.
Right.
And then build on top of our solutions.
Okay. Talking about the development strategy then, if you've got 4 or 5 developers in a team, does each developer have their own environment? Is your development environment a kind of development integration environment, or are you using a shared?
No, we use a shared development environment usually.
Okay.
Yeah.
Have you seen any benefits in going for every developer having their own environment?
Not in this size. So not if you only have like 4 or 5 people doing stuff. If it's getting bigger, what we planning to do in another project we just started, which is quite a big implementation as well. We have several teams doing stuff, and then every team gets a development environment, and then we have a development integration or merged development, and then we go further on to UAT and integration test and so on. But every team still is like 4 or 5 developers, and they share the environment.
Yeah, I remember working with Microsoft Consulting Services many years ago, probably 10 years ago, and this was on-prem CRM, probably 2011, and all of their developers had individual development environments, and it was the first time I'd seen that, and it was pretty shocking to me at the time, because back then environments were really expensive, not just another license needed, but you had to have your own hardware essentially. It was a maybe overkill for the size of project they were working on at that time, but I can imagine that approach being useful, like you said, if you're working in a multi-team development group. Yeah,
and then if you go that path, there's other things to consider, like branching strategies of your Azure Dev or your repository and so on. So I know we have like this Power Platform Level Up Discord, which is for developers. So if there is some developer listening in, I will drop you the link. So please join. Really great discussions. And there was a discussion around exactly that a few weeks ago. And some of those were like, okay, we have it per developer or per feature. And we create automatically the environments in the night or during the night, like 10 or 15. And then they can claim it. And then they will be like trashed in the night thereafter and stuff. But it's a lot of management and a lot of pipelines running automatically during the night, deleting environments and so on. So and also the merging of those in branches and so on. It's a lot of overhead.
Yeah. It's amazing, that with the flexibility that we have, lots of teams come up with their own practices. I'm sure if you peeked inside what my team does, you'd scratch your head at some of the things that we get up to. But it feels right for us. It's appropriate. It's everybody's used to it, and sometimes that's just these things emerge not designed from on a piece of paper. They just,
Yeah.
the practices emerge, and suddenly we end up with something that's quite complicated when somebody else looks at it.
Yeah, and the template we have is it grew over time as well. So first we started with like the pipeline, and it was like, oh, maybe we want to run our tests there as well. Oh yeah, I will add it, and so on. So there were a lot of iterations for it.
Yeah. Well, I bet if somebody else took a peek at your team's template, they would scratch their head as well.
Yeah, I would say so. Yes. Jonas does sometimes when he look at our template I created.
We're thinking about what can be included in ALM. So there are definitely parts of the Dynamics 365 or Power Platform component stack that are still quite difficult to include in a solution. I was delighted recently. I think what are they called? The access teams were finally made solution aware, so now I can include those in my solution. You've mentioned functions, Azure functions, a couple of times. So I presume that your ALM process includes Power Platform solutions, but other components as well, Azure components. How are you handling things that are not solution aware and including Azure components as well?
Yeah, that depends on the component for sure. Because basically Azure components, they are quite easy to handle because they have usually good pipeline support in Azure DevOps or GitHub Actions. For example, Azure Functions, there are steps for it. You can just use those. There is like 1 or 2 steps to deploy those. So we have a special YAML template which you can reuse for every Azure function we have, and then it will deploy those. And we also sometimes use biceps scripts to create the resources in Azure DevOps to make sure they all are the same, and naming conventions and so on.
Right.
And those run in the same pipeline as our solution. So when we deploy to tests, then we either first deploy our solutions and then our Azure components, or the other way around. Depends on suits us best. But if it comes to components which are within the Power Platform but not solution aware, it's more complicated. And then it depends. Some of those you can just move with configuration migration tool from Microsoft.
Yes.
If it's just data, basically. But others are way more complicated, and you need some PowerShell scripts to do stuff. Yeah, for example, if you want to move the application detection rules, they have to be inactivated before they can be exported. Otherwise, they won't follow in the solution. So you should have a script which goes through them, deactivates the ones you want to export or have in your solution, so you don't forget to inactivate those and then mess your environment up. Such stuff, which is very messy. And then there's other stuff where you need different solutions, for example, because usually Microsoft's recommendation is to have one monolith solution. That's what they say. Or the solution separation or segmentation, but then one solution, or for every solution you need a separate environment, because otherwise you could get dependencies and so on.
Yeah.
That's Microsoft recommendation. And then there is stuff which you can't have in the same solution. For example, if you have a custom connector and flows using this custom connector, they can't be in the same solution because, and I don't know the details under the hood, but they tried to install the flows before the custom connectors. I assume because it
probably, yeah.
Because there's some missing dependencies because the flow wants to have the custom connector, which isn't there in the same solution. So you have to have a separate solution and install the custom connector first.
That sounds like that should be an easy fix in the solution importer.
We also had a discussion with some from Microsoft in this Discord, and they were like, the problem is that the custom connectors are hosted in API management in Azure, and they have to deploy it there. And there's some timely stuff that is asynchronous, and then it's too slow or something. So they can't easily fix it, unfortunately. So that's one of the known limitations. And And then as well, like stuff like SLAs and automatic record creation rules, they should be in their own solution with all the components you need. And like the automatic record creation rules and the related flows should be in the same solution. Otherwise, you could get errors. And if anything else is in the solution, you could also get errors. So all this stuff has to be handled as well.
Yeah, I think that we have such rich and varied applications these days that I'm sure there are very specific lessons learned around Dynamics 365 marketing and how email templates and customer journeys get migrated. Or if you're working with Power Pages, the strategy for migrating portals keeps evolving, which is great. But if you haven't done a portals project or a Power Pages project for 12 months, you're going to have to relearn your ALM techniques. You just mentioned lots of great stuff there about customer service and SLAs. I'm sure if you're working with Power BI and you've got reports and charts and dashboards authored in Power BI and you want to move those in the solution, there's different strategies as well. So there's so much to learn. I was wondering, do you see a pattern where there is a role for a DevOps engineer within a Microsoft partner practice or within a team who's just a specialist in YAML and pipelines and all of these edge cases, and they're the expert that all the teams rely on for how do we get this stuff into production? Or do you see teams just learning and managing ALM on their own without that central specialist?
No, I see a space for this type of roles. And I don't have this role, but I would say I have this role in our company. So it's not an official role. But basically in every project where we have our pipelines or want to move to our pipelines, I will be called into more or less. And if there are any troubles in the pipeline failing or so on, then I usually help my colleagues resolving those. So I think it would be good to have at least one person that really knows all the whereabouts, or not all of it. I don't know all of it either. So, but that knows how to navigate in it and how to get the information. If something happens, and knows YAML and the usual pitfalls you can have, or and how to fix those.
Benedikt, well, thanks very much for sharing your ALM experience with us. It sounds like Power Platform Pipelines is still a great place to start if you're a low-code maker. Learn the basics of the techniques there. There's some shortcomings though, and so they might need to work with a professional developer in their team. And then bigger teams, bigger projects, really need to start with Azure DevOps and consider building out some templates to make their ALM processes repeatable across projects and across teams. We didn't get to touch too much on the differences or the similarities between Azure DevOps and GitHub. We'll maybe save that one for another topic as well. Is there anything else you'd like to share with our audience? I'd love to, if you have a few moments, I'd love to grab you in a retrospective. But is there anything else you'd like to share with our audience on this topic?
Don't be afraid and get started with it. And if you have any questions, just reach out and I'm happy to help.
Yeah, good. Okay. Well, Nick Dolman's quote still stands true. No project is too small for ALM. Benedikt endorses that philosophy. Yes. So go for it. Thanks so much for sharing your ALM expertise with us. And we will catch up with you soon.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks. I hope you enjoyed that episode with Benedikt Bergmann. Thanks for joining me, Benedikt. I appreciate you staying up late at home in Stockholm to join me here in Brisbane. If you'd like to check out Benedikt's deep dive course into Power Platform ALM, remember to check the link in the show notes. It's on the 29th and 30th of August, 2023, from 9 a.m. to 4 p.m. Central Eastern European Time, Central European Summertime. It'll be awesome. You'll find a registration link in the show notes at amazingapps.show/147. I'm trying to persuade Benedikt to create an on-demand, online version of the course. If that's something you'd be interested in, perhaps you missed his live course, you're tuning into this episode later, or the timing just doesn't work for you, let Benedikt know. Comment down below if you're on YouTube, or on the customary company page on LinkedIn if you're listening to the audio podcast. That's it for this episode. Thanks for joining me. Until next time, keep experimenting